our meeting tomorrow. Class at 9 is going to start off with laws about slaves. Throw it out there. Yeah, definitely starting off with a bit of a there. Cole, whenever you can, flip on the audio.
Should be on.
No. There we go.
Friends in town, right? So we're not gonna get them or my dad.
Yeah, your dad has a doc. He's prepping for a very pleasant experience.
Yeah, or Randy. So you might be
Yeah.
looking at your crowd.
Do they have? Yeah, I know they have somebody coming into town because I remember off.
They were gone Sunday too.
Yeah, they were at a camping trip on Sunday, like a weekend. So, anyways, we'll go ahead and get rolling there in Exodus chapter 21, and so kind of what we've seen so far in the book of Exodus to this point, that Israel was enslaved. There in Egypt, they were being oppressed and afflicted. They cry out. Then God sends 10 plagues so that Egypt and the entire world will know that He is God. And I think we even pointed out and talked about how those plagues even have some level of maybe connection to perhaps some of the Egyptian gods. And so God defeats the Egyptian gods. Israel walks out by going through the Red Sea. They get to Sinai, and while they're at Sinai, they begin to enter this covenant relationship with God. And there's this incredible scene where God comes down in all of His glory, and we're going to unpack that even more over the next, even tonight, there in Exodus chapter 24. I will say this, kind of connecting some dots as we continue our study through the Old Testament on Wednesday nights, that Exodus 19, when they arrive at Sinai, to Numbers chapter, I think it's 10 or 11, that includes the entire book of Leviticus, is all there at Sinai. I mean, you're talking about, I think it's like an 11-month period. And so, for the next several months, as we walk through Exodus and Leviticus and even into Numbers, we're going to see Israel at Sinai. And one other thing to note, because I got a text message today about it, and I'm glad I did, before I forget, the summer series begins at the end of June. June 25th is our first summer series. So we'll move from Wednesday to Thursday, and we'll kick it off. The summer series flyers are on the back, and you should start seeing some social graphics over the next couple of weeks start popping up just to remind you about that change here coming up. So anyways, back in Exodus, that Israel has been redeemed. They have been saved. And now, as a result of that salvation, that redemption, God is entering this covenant relationship with Israel. And God basically is telling us, like, okay, I've redeemed you. I want you to be my people. And so here's what that looks like. And so we saw the Ten Commandments, which is kind of like the Constitution. It's the basic framework of what it looks like to live as God's holy people. And then we get to Exodus chapter 21, and then you get a series of laws that we see. Laws about slaves, laws about personal injury, laws about theft and crop protection and personal property and seduction and capital offenses and protecting the vulnerable and honesty and justice and so on and so forth. A series of situations. And one of the things I do want to point out about these laws that we're about to read is a lot of these laws find some sort of parallel in one of the many other laws that we have from the ancient world. Did anybody hear about Hammurabi's Code when they were in school? Do you remember reading about it or seeing something about it on like Nat Geo? Hammurabi was a Babylonian king, a couple hundred years, I believe, if I remember correctly, maybe even closer to 500 years before the Exodus. And it has a law code, and there's a lot of similarities there. That's the most famous one. But there's a lot of parallels that you see there. One of the other things I want to kind of keep in mind is a lot of these laws are dealing with, for lack of a better way of phrasing it, not an ideal situation. They're not, they're when things break down, let me put it that way. They're what happens when there's a problem, when there's an issue. How do you deal with it? That's what you see with a lot of these laws. And so we'll kick off right here, there in Exodus chapter 1. Just big picture as we start digging into these laws. What do these laws, big picture here, teach us about justice? What do these laws, Exodus 21 through 23, yeah, Craig?
Accountability is what
Yeah.
keep in mind.
Accountability is definitely one of them. Like if you look ahead, past the laws about slaves and to the next section, laws about personal injury is my heading. You see various situations that you are accountable for your actions, and that accountability takes different forms in that situation. What else strikes you about these laws and justice? As you look at these laws, let's think about our laws just for a second. If I go out and I steal, I was talking earlier about going to the Lincoln Square Mall, and I go into the Apple store there. Live stream I'm not planning to do, so I want to be very clear. And I walk into the Apple store, and I walk out with a couple iPads. And security or the cops arrest me. What's my punishment? Generally speaking, there's probably going to be some.
Nothing.
No, well, you may be right there in the society that we live in. But in the old days, back when it would be jail, right? You would spend a certain amount of time because it was a felony versus misdemeanor and all that kind of stuff. But in this situation, when you steal, you're not spending time in the slammer. You're making restitution. So that accountability, kind of draw that out a little bit. The accountability is, hey, you stole, you're going to have to pay back this much. You hurt this person, here's the result. That your actions have consequences. And so you weren't necessarily, as we just said, spending time in the slammer. You were making things right with the person that you hurt. That it would be like if I walked in there and stole an iPad, I would have to buy 4 iPads. I'd pay them the price of 4 iPads to make it right. So there's an accountability aspect there to those laws. What else about the justice do you see here in the text?
It's kind of like if you do this, then this will happen.
Yeah. And that's kind of what, tying into what you just said, right? The breakdown aspect. That they're not the ideal, to modernize it a little bit. If you're driving the speed limit on the highway between Jerusalem and Bethlehem, no, that's not the situation. If you're driving 20 miles an hour over the speed limit and you hit somebody, here's what the situation. It's less than ideal situations. when you find yourself in a less than ideal situation, if that happens to you or it happens in the land as God's covenant people, here's what's going to happen. What else do you guys see here? Big picture about these laws. Anything else jump out to these laws? Yeah.
Sometimes motive matters.
Yeah. How so? Dig into that.
Sometimes it doesn't, right? Like, when it says, like, if you willfully attack someone,
Yeah.
they can take you from the altar, it says. So,
Yeah.
like, we have an idea that churches are sacred, but this
Yeah.
suggests that if you're guilty of that,
Yeah.
then you're in trouble. But the next law, you know, you shall honor your mother and father, if not, you'll be dead.
Yeah.
That one doesn't have a motive attached to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so motive matters. We even have that a little bit to our day. Like, and I'm not a legal expert, so if I'm wrong here, please correct me. But my understanding is like you have first-degree murder. That's premeditated murder. It's where I say to myself, I'm going to kill Red because you're right here, and I make a plan and I carry it out. And then there's the second and third degree, and then there's the manslaughter. Is kind of what happens maybe when you're driving a little too fast and you lose control and you kill somebody. They'll charge you with vehicular manslaughter or something like that. So there's varying degrees. Motive matters. The situation matters. Yeah. Okay, let's dig into some of these laws here, starting there with the laws about slave. And I mentioned a moment ago, we're starting off with the grenade. Does it strike you, as we kick it off tonight, that there are laws here in Exodus chapter 1 dealing with slavery? Why or why not? Does it jump out to you? What kind of situation is he talking about here? When you think about slavery, what comes to our mind? Like, we think about it today, and our minds immediately go to what our country was involved in 200 years ago. That wasn't always the case in Israel. That when it's talking about slavery in Exodus 21, it seems to be more often like we would call indentured servitude. Okay, if you can go back in the history books a little bit, going back 400 years, you may have a poor person in Ireland who is the youngest child and knows they're not going to get any inheritance, they're not going to get any land from mommy or daddy, and they hear about this new world, and they're poor, but in this new world, everyone's equal and there's plenty of land, and so they go to a rich person and say, okay, if you'll pay for my trip over to the new world, I'll go to the Virginia colony and I'll work for you for 6 years. And when that 6 years is up, I'll have my freedom. And so that 6 years would pay for that passage to the new world where they could get a fresh start. That's a lot of times what it is talking about. Where somebody there in the ancient world would have a farm and a drought would come. And because of the drought, they couldn't grow crops. And because they couldn't grow crops, they couldn't provide for their family. And so they had to go into debt. And that debt piled up and they couldn't pay that debt. And so as a result of, as a way of paying them back, they would sell themselves into slavery for so many years. That the laws here, the slavery laws here, were not permanent like we're used to in our country 200 years ago. They were temporary. It was more like indentured servitude in our way. And in fact, skipping ahead just in our minds to the Minor Prophets, one of the things you see in the Minor Prophets is God consistently calls out oppression. Those moments in time in Israel's history when the rich were oppressing the poor and they were taking advantage of the poor. And they were exacting high interest rates and breaking their brothers and sisters because of that debt. And so it was a little different. And so as he described these laws about slavery here in Exodus chapter 21, it is still less than an ideal situation. You don't want to be in debt to the point that you have to sell yourself into slavery. Yeah, Lisa.
It feels like you're prettying it up.
How so?
Well, look at verse 20. When a man strikes a slave, male or female, with the rod, and the slave dies under his hand, he shall be avenged. But if the slave survives a day or two, he is not to be avenged, for the slave is his money. So we can say that it's not like the American civil thing where the
Yeah.
slaves
Yeah.
were treated badly and that they were indentured servants. But God's law clearly allows them to be beaten.
Yeah. And so, again, I'm focusing right now on verses 1 through 11. I see what you're saying. In fact, there's some other laws, some causistic laws,
Yeah.
as I think they're called, that are really challenging to deal with. I don't know if we're going to get to it tonight, and maybe more like Leviticus or Deuteronomy, that are really, really, really difficult. That's one of them, what you mentioned there, where it does kind of, there's no punishment when the owner there assaults them there in verse 20 and 21. But big picture there in 1 through 11, I do think it is talking more often than not it was an indentured servitude type of situation. Not always, surely, but frequently there it was indentured servitude. And there are some challenging, and honestly, this section of the Old Testament, these laws, are really, really difficult for a lot of reasons. Because there are some laws that we look at today, and we're going,
I'm going to be your Kevin. So in your scenarios where you present it to us, it's always a man making a choice. I'm poor. I'm going to beat. We'd also see a man selling his daughter into slavery. Like it's not as pretty as we'd like to be like, well, it's the good version of slavery.
so.
It's not that pretty.
So, okay, so a couple things to that specific one there in verse, was it 6 through 11?
Yeah.
So a couple of things just to kind of consider the context. That one is probably talking more specifically, and again, I'm trying to add some historical, cultural context to this to help maybe connect some dots here in the text, realizing some challenges that we have to deal with because of the society that we grew up in, and there's some challenging text here. I want to fully acknowledge that. But there in 6 through 11, it also seems there in the text to be talking about some level of almost a marriage. Not quite a marriage, but there in the ancient world, even in the best of situations, a marriage was a contract. That a man went to another man and said, you have a son, I have a daughter, they're about the same age, let's get married. And so some stuff would be exchanged. You'd have the dowry, you have the bride price, you'd have all that stuff going back and forth. In this situation, it seems to me almost, and listening to some stuff today on this, trying to work it out, because it is challenging, Lisa. It seems to be talking about a situation when a father could no longer afford to support the daughter because they were so poor, and a rich man was willing to provide support. That kind of situation. I had not considered that explanation. Someone put that forward today. Someone, I'll throw out there, who's written a book on Exodus for kicks and giggles. Again, these laws are hard because we look at slavery and that brings to mind things in our mind immediately there as we wrestle with these ideas of slavery. And again, these laws, like the slavery one is hard. The one in verse 20 and 21 is hard. You're going to see one where there's like varying approaches to the fetus. I want to put that before you because you may hear that from a politician quoting some of this stuff, just putting it out there. Anyway, so that's the slavery, laws about slavery that it does seem to be more indentured servitude, concubine-ish, that you're selling your daughter to provide on some level. Again, generally speaking, that seems to be what's going on. Again, not endorsing it, just understanding historical context, trying to connect some dots for us today. There in verse 12 through the next several verses, it's talking about laws about personal injury. That he's talking, the covenant people of God. And he's like, hey, look, if you plotted to put somebody to death, you must be put to death. There's capital punishment laws here. You look at some of the sins and transgressions there. Schemes and willfully acts against his neighbor to murder him. You must not take him from my altar, be put to death. Whoever strikes his father or mother be put to death. And some of the language there in verse 15 and 16, or verse 15 specifically, the strikes there has some linguistic characteristics going back to murder. So this is not just I lost control of my emotions, which is a different sin and needs to be dealt with as well, but may also be whoever strikes his mother and father, as in to put them to death, must be put to death. Kidnapping is there. Cursing your father and mother, put to death. Some laws about abuse and assault and all that kind of stuff in 18 and 19 and 20 and 21, as Lisa pointed out, 2021. All the way down to 23, 24, 25. If there is an injury, then you must give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, bruise for bruise, wound for wound. That there is this law of equal retribution. That if you do something, you will have something done back to you. Justice will happen. All the way through the text, even down to the end of the chapter, 26 through 29, strikes the eye of a slave, slave goes free. The ox gores a man. In fact, from like 28 to the end of the chapter, it's, hey, if your ox, your animal, hurts somebody, here's what happens in this situation. This is how you respect, this is how you treat, this is how you make restitution there in the text. All the way down to chapter 22, and there's more laws about theft. And if you steal an ox or a sheep and you butcher it or you sell it, you must repay 5 cattle for an ox or 4 sheep for the sheep. Okay, let's pause there. Think ahead to David's story. 2 Samuel 11, David commits Bathsheba, commits adultery with Bathsheba. And Nathan confronts him. What does David say to Nathan? He must pay 4 times. Then he's confronted, hey, you're the man. And what happens to David? 4 of his sons died untimely deaths. That's an interesting little parallel there in David's life, just to see that. But you see that idea, that concept there pop up there in David's life. The idea of restitution, making things right. Then there's laws about crop protection and how you treat your crop, and laws about personal property. And if a man there in verse 7 gives his neighbor valuables or goods to keep and they are stolen from the person's house, the thief, if he's caught, must pay double. So if Craig lets me borrow his tools and someone steals them from me, they got to buy him 2 DeWalt nail guns. So you get the idea. If the thief is not caught, the owner of the house must present himself to the judges to determine whether or not he has taken his neighbor's property. If in any case of wrongdoing involving an ox, donkey, sheep, garment, and someone claims that's mine, and the case between the 2 parties is to come before the judges, the one the judges condemn must repay double to his neighbor. Again, this is worst case scenario. When a man gives his neighbor, no one gives your tools to a friend expecting them to get stolen. That's a worst case scenario, right? Verse 10, when a man gives his neighbor a donkey, ox, sheep, or any other animal to care for, but it dies, is injured, or is stolen while no one is watching, there must be an oath before the Lord between the 2 of them to determine whether or not he has taken his neighbor's property. Its owner must accept the oath, and the other man does not have to make restitution. But if the animal is stolen, the one who stole must make restitution. If the animal was torn apart by a wild animal, you don't have to make restitution, you just need to prove it. So on and so forth, all the way down. And then you get to laws about seduction, which I think in some way, those are some challenging laws to deal with, I think, as well. That if a man seduces a virgin who is not engaged and he sleeps with her, he must certainly pay the bridal price for her to be his wife. If the father absolutely refuses to give her to him, he must pay an amount in silver equal to the bridal price for virgins. That's hard for us to kind of wrap our minds around today in our society. Again, these are worst case scenarios. Do not allow the sorceress to live. Whoever has sexual intercourse with an animal must be put to death. Whoever sacrifices to any god except the Lord alone is to be set apart for destruction. That's an idea we'll come up and we'll see more often in the book of Joshua. And then there in verse 21, chapter 22 and through 21, there are laws about the vulnerable. How do these laws protect them? How do the laws God has written? We've talked about justice. Let's focus here on the vulnerable. Yeah, Craig?
So it kind of switches to compassion. Just,
Yeah.
when they get the interest-free loans.
Yeah.
And then, I think we're jumping ahead a little bit, that it talks about where they're able to win other people's fields. And then, I think it's the 7th year.
Yeah.
Get anything to harvest out of there. And it's later that we're told that they left the corners of the fields for the poor.
Yeah.
So he's got his eye out.
Yeah, God has his eye out for the poor. And that's, again, going ahead and skipping ahead to the Old Testament, God is watching how Israel treated the poor and oppressed. And one of the main themes in the Old Testament, especially the prophets, is that Israel didn't do it. They were oppressing the poor. And you see that throughout the prophets. That God cares how the weakest are treated. We even see hints of that in the New Testament. Think about James chapter 1. Pure and undefiled religion is what? Sitting in the church pew every Sunday morning, singing a couple songs, dressing the right way. Pure and undefiled religion is, I want to paraphrase here, watching out for the orphan and the widow. That here in the text, as God is writing this law, writing this covenant for his people, he is protecting them. Which, one other thing to throw out there as you look at the covenant that God is making with Israel and the covenant that and the laws of the ancient Near East, the laws of the ancient Near East differentiated between social status. That if you're rich, you did this. If you're poor, you did this. And this is how it is. It's equal, generally speaking. There's a couple exceptions. Leeson pointed out the slave one there in chapter 20. But generally speaking, it's not, if I kill somebody and I'm rich, I get by with it. But if I'm poor, I don't. It's, if you kill somebody, rich or poor, there's a punishment for that. You see? And so God is watching out for how his people are treated there in the text. That God cares about the foreigners and the widows and the orphans.
I think verse 31 was important too. You shall be holy men to me, therefore you shall not eat any flesh, so on and so on. But
Yeah.
he's trying to make us be holy too. He wants us to be holy.
Yeah, and that's, go back to, so one of these things that we're going to see in this law, like God has redeemed them from Egypt. He's sending this covenant so a holy God can be in a relationship with a people. And for that to happen, they have to be a holy people. A holy God cannot be in a relationship with unholy people. Is that, okay, making sure. Okay, 23. You must not spread a false report. Don't lie. Don't join the wicked to be a malicious witness. You must not follow a crowd in wrongdoing. Do not testify in a lawsuit and go along with the crowd to pervert justice. Do not show favoritism to a poor person in his lawsuit. If you come across an enemy's stray ox or donkey, you must return it to him. Basic laws about honesty and justice. You must not take a bribe, verse 8. For a bribe corrupts the words of the righteous. You must not, again, oppress the resident alien. You yourselves know how it feels to be a resident alien because you were resident aliens in Egypt. You've been there. You've done that. You know how it is to live in a world that is not your home. Over and over and over again. Craig mentioned the Sabbath year. So 6 years, and on the 7th year, let it rest. Leave it uncultivated. So that the animals and the poor people can grab what they need. Do the same with your vineyard and your olive grove. Do your work for 6 days, rest on the 7th. So everybody's refreshed. Pay special, this is key, verse 13, strict attention to everything I have said to you. You must not invoke the names of other gods. They must not be heard on your lips. Celebrate a festival. Again, that's that don't have any other gods before me. We're going to see that. And the next section, really, really planned out. Then it gets in verse 14 through 19, a bunch of festivals that they're supposed to celebrate each and every year. We're going to look at those in more detail when we get a little farther down the road. So I'm going to let those kind of stand for that time. And then verse 20, I am going to send an angel before you to protect you on the way, to bring you to the place that I have prepared. Does that language sound familiar to you? I am going to send an angel or a messenger before you to prepare the way.
John the Baptist.
John the Baptist. Malachi chapter 3, anticipating John the Baptist. There are a couple of parallels here, linguistically and thematically here, that this messenger and angel promises to go before. There in Malachi 3:1, it's applied to John the Baptist who goes before Jesus. The messenger goes before Israel. Jesus goes before his people to prepare a place for them, just as the messenger goes to prepare a place for Israel. The messenger will protect them. And Jesus says in John 17, I have guarded you, I have protected you. Some of the language is very, very similar because John is trying to emphasize that Jesus has brought the new Israel, or is going to bring the new Israel into their spiritual destination that Canaan was foreshadowing and anticipating. And then we get to this command we're going to see over and over and over again. He keeps repeating it because Israel's going to have this same problem throughout their history. There in chapter 23 and verse 24 and 25. Do not bow and worship to their gods and do not serve them. Do not imitate their practices. Instead, demolish them and smash their sacred pillars to pieces. He looks ahead and said, okay, guys, when you're going into the land that I'm going to give you, and you're going through and you're pushing out, you're driving out the nations, get rid of their gods, because they will be a snare to you. Serve the Lord your God, and he will bless you with bread and with water and remove illness. No woman would miscarry and be childless in your land. I will give you the full number of your days. In other words, you go in, you get the land, you're going to be blessed. But if you don't, there are consequences. This is all going to be, I'm doing all of this for you. All of this for God's people. Okay, real quickly, as we kind of summarize Exodus 21 through 23, what does it teach us about living as God's holy people? Ray kind of hit on it a moment ago. Be a holy people. That's really what this is all about. He's saying, okay, you're my people. I'm your God. Here's how you need to live. You need to live holy. You need to live steadfast.
Austin?
Yeah.
So the question that keeps coming in my mind is a harder one, I think.
Yeah.
That when we look at Exodus 21 through 23 and we see many things that are hard for us to swallow about God's laws for their society.
Yeah.
Things that about how they treated people and how they established different financial worth for different people and all those things. And then we see some laws that we could carry forward into how we treat people today, and some laws that we don't think carry forward.
Okay.
Laws about, eating things that have been torn up, and there's a lot of laws that are things we don't carry forward.
Okay.
So my question is, how do we decide when we should carry a principle forward? So like we have this principle here about how you should treat foreigners. Is that one by default we should carry forward into today, or is it not? I mean, I would think we would argue that you wouldn't carry the financial, a slave is worth less than a master, and a son is worth more than a daughter. Like those things we don't carry forward. So how do you decide which of these ideas in Exodus 21 to 23 we do carry forward?
So that's a great question. The simplest way to answer it is the ones that we know for certain to carry forward are echoed in some way in the New Testament. Treating the foreigner, let's start there. What Jesus talks about, what are the two commandments? Love God, love others. That as God's people, that we have a responsibility to love all people, wherever they're from, whatever border they may have crossed. Now, there may be some legal and political ramifications that as we talk to them and we hopefully are trying to bring them to Christ, we have to have a conversation about. I'm not denying that possibility. But I would see, to answer your question about that one, specifically, love them, care for them, look out for them, in the ways we can. That make sense?
Sure.
Certainly, we could probably go down one by one. Does this carry? Does this not? But generally speaking, what I see in the New Testament, the ones that I think are applicable to us, there are principles that carry, or ideas or concepts that are repeated in some way there in the New Testament. At least that's the way I see it. And so unless it's not specifically repeated thematically or conceptually, then those are the ones that maybe stay back in the Old Testament. Does that help a little bit?
It does, but I think it points out like where sometimes we struggle, because we have to come to grips with the idea that God set laws in the Old Testament that we would find distasteful today and that we wouldn't carry forward.
Yeah.
And so that, I think, is where I get like, let's not pretty it up too much. We have to wrestle with that. We have to wrestle with the fact that God set laws for them that we would find unjust in today's understanding.
Yeah.
We have to decide we serve a God who is just.
Yeah.
So I think that we can't forget that dichotomy exists, right? We have to struggle with the fact that some of those laws, we would say, no, we're not carrying those.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And to highlight your point, again, to avoid using the terminology used, cleaning it up, those describe a worst case scenario. So in a worst case scenario, here's how you live as justly as possible in a worst case scenario.
They're laws to live with. That was the structure of their laws that God handed down for them, right? They're not all worst case scenarios. Some of them are everyday scenarios.
Some
right?
of them are, but a lot of them, the nature of these laws, the style of law, especially in the ancient world, I doing reading because I was anticipating some of these questions tonight, especially the slavery one, because I know that's hard for us. Like that's a hard one for us because we think slavery, and we think immediately what our country did and what the colonies did and what people have done for thousands of years. Like, we were not the only country involved. I'm going to try to avoid making too many political statements tonight, but we were not the only country involved in the slave trade. We were not the only group of people involved in the slave trade. We were not, doesn't make it right, doesn't make it fair. What happened was awful. But a lot of this is like trying to figure out again, this style law. Again, what I was reading, because you open up commentaries on Exodus and they're all trying to wrestle with a lot of these concepts, is they're paradigmatic. And what I mean by that is they're examples on how to navigate life. Not necessarily, this is, because I'm still wrestling with some of this. I want to be very honest if you can't tell. When you look ahead into 1 Kings chapter 3, which we looked at Sunday, and Solomon asks for wisdom. He wants to be understand and discern and to listen to God's law. Because some of the laws, as we're seeing tonight, are not, they're situational. You have to look at these principles and these laws and try to determine how best to apply the law in each situation. And they're dealing with worst case scenarios and all this stuff. And it takes wisdom to know how to apply which laws in each way. And I think Lisa is right. We're looking at a lot of these laws that we see here, especially the slavery and some of the other ones, that we're going, oh, this is making us queasy because of the culture that we live in.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, a lot of it is culture.
Yeah.
That they had a mentality we can't even relate to, and he was taking them where they were at and raising them up as much as he could. Where we have a mentality is like, you don't kill people, you put them in jail forever.
Yeah.
And the idea
Yeah.
of killing somebody all the time.
Yeah. And the other aspect here to keep in mind, as we're looking at this, is God is watching them, and if they are unjust to their slaves, what is God going to do? He's going to execute his justice on them. That God is watching everything they do. How they treat their slaves, how they treat the resident alien, how they treat the oppressed and the widow and the orphan. God is watching all of it. And if they don't act justly, God will act in his justice. Does that help any as you're wrestling with this, Lisa?
I think you still have to come to grips with that God set up laws for them to establish different boards for different people. And you can say it's because he was working with where they're at. You have to our honest, loving, just God set up the society that way. And we can't hide from that fact or say, well, it's not as bad as what we're thinking of. He did set up different. You know, if a man should sell his daughter as a slave and that man doesn't want her, he's allowed to give her to somebody else. Like, those things are not treating people with the same worth in society, and God allows for that. He does, right? You may call it worst case scenario, but it was commonplace. And so we have to acknowledge that. And I know that God is just and loving, and so I have to come to grips with the fact that I don't understand that, and that's what God did anyway, right? I don't want to explain it away so that I don't have to look at it.
No, I get that. But the other side of it is there is a breakdown in context that we also have to connect and try to understand. That's the indentured servitude. Not every situation was indentured servitude. I want to be very clear. But it seems to a lot of people that a good bit of them were indentured servitude. The buying and selling, I will also throw out there, that is commonplace today. It is commonplace today, and the idea here for people to buy and sell, even in modern Western society. The Seattle Sounders had the contract for a forward or a striker, and they may get a call from Manchester United and say, we want to buy the contract. That's the idea here in the text. You're buying the contract.
I just think you're making it so easy to slide down when it's not easy like that. These people are being sold without their consent, right? A man is selling his daughter, the daughter is not conceding that, right? I just think we have to be honest. Those are hard situations that God allowed. He said it's okay to do that if you want to.
Okay.
He didn't say you had to be poor. He just said if a man sells his daughter, a man sells his daughter, right?
But the word there, it is a contractual word, which is why the analogy for sports actually fits. That you have teams that there's a contract. It's not a, there's some linguistic stuff going on there as well, which is why I use that, which is actually what some people actually use as an illustration to draw, kind of deal with it. So, okay, Exodus 24, the covenant ceremony. Okay, there, so God has issued these series of laws. Then God said to Moses, go up to the Lord, you and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and 70 of the Israel's elders to bow and worship at a distance. And Moses alone is to worship the Lord, but the others are not to approach. And the people are not to go up with them. That there are these boundaries that are set. That there's this order that God is giving to Moses on what's about to happen here. And so Moses came and told everything to the people, and they're like, we're going to do everything. Keep in mind what's going on here in Exodus 24. Keep in mind, because we're going to see some things in Exodus 32 as all this stuff is going down. They don't keep this covenant very long. And so Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord, and he rose early the next morning and set up an altar, 12 pillars, 12 tribes at the base of the mountain. They offer burnt offerings and sacrifice and fellowship offerings and all this stuff. Took blood, took the covenant scroll. The people again affirm in verse 7, we will do and obey all that the Lord has commanded. And then Moses took the blood, splattered it on the people, and said, this is the blood of the covenant. Does that sound familiar? Lord's Supper, that the Lord has made with you concerning all these words. And then Moses went up with Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and 70 of Israel's elders, and they saw the God of Israel and the lapis lazuli and all this stuff. And they have this fellowship meal there in verse 11. And then Moses goes up the mountain. The cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord settled on the mountain. The cloud covered it for 6 days, and on the 7th day he called out for Moses from the cloud. And verse 17, the appearance of the Lord's glory to the Israelites was like a consuming fire. Again, fire and cloud, where we've seen that before several times in the Exodus story. Moses entered the cloud as he went up on the mountain, and he remained on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. There we go. So really quickly, kind of summarizing a couple of questions really quick. What does Exodus 24 teach us about God? What does Exodus 24 teach us about God?
We can't understand it. He is so holy beyond us.
Yes, I think that's kind of spot on here in the text. It's God is holy. Like there's these boundaries set up. You can't go any farther. Moses is the only one who can go up. You know, all these boundaries, all this you see there in the text. He is holy. He is powerful. This entire thing you've seen, especially at the end of the chapter, as God comes down and Moses goes up, is just really kind of interesting to kind of picture in our minds. But also, anyways, any other thoughts, comments, or questions? I thought I had another question on there. Okay, we'll call it there, and we'll pick up next week.